What's up, ATG fam, and welcome to my ankle sprain formula. Step 1 is flossing 1,000 reps a day. This is broken up as 10 sets of 100, doing 10 up and back, 10 circles one way, 10 circles the other way, continued, you get to 90, and then the final 10, another 10 straight. That is phase 1. That is helping you get to where you can even walk, to where you can even go back into the gym. Once you're going back into the gym, what is stage 2? What's the first weight you're gonna lift? It's gonna be with your ankle. 3 sets of 60 seconds, because I don't want you rushing it, so you're using time. And you're slowly going in one way, full circle, using your thigh to help get gravity to overload that ankle in each direction. Once you get around to one side, then you're going back to the other side. This is going to help you then get to where you're ready to go back onto the playing surface. But before you go into actual games, now stage 3 is handling your own weight, your full body weight on either side, to the outside of the ankle, to the inside of the ankle, and the other side to the outside, to the inside. But you could do this 3 sets of 60 seconds with 2-minute breaks. That takes only 7 minutes total if you add it up. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. But for some people, even getting into that is going to be too painful to start. So in replacement of that, or as warm-up for that, it takes a little while, but you would do 3 sets of 20 reps on each side of your ankle using a band under your Achilles, up, and then bring it, depending on which way you bring it around, you can actually get your ankle to a twist, just like simulating that sprain. So we're stretching but strengthening, so don't let the band go. Keep the band pulled. You totally dictate the pressure, keep it at a level that feels good, but over time, the more you pull. Now, as you extend, keep it pulled, and you can actually get in and strengthen each side of that ankle to then help you either warm up, as I said, to then get into actually handling your own body weight. Now, those are the 3 steps. I wanted to get those right out of the way. If you want to understand more about this, how I came to these conclusions, why we're doing these different drills, let's keep carrying forward, okay? So since I began my knees over toes journey 10 years ago, only twice did something in my lower body stop me from playing basketball. They were almost identical injuries in both cases. Basically, I landed on someone's foot. And if you think in basketball, and this happens in many sports, but in basketball, we're wearing these high-heeled shoes, right? So now imagine I land on someone wearing like a freaking size 15 shoe, and now my heel's elevated. It's a massive roll. So the shorter you are in basketball, factually, the more severe the sprain is. But the taller you are, your foot's huge in everyone's way, the more likely you are to have a sprain. You can't win. We're all screwed, and we're all screwed by the fact that we're playing on a hard surface, so it's not forgiving. We're then locked up in shoes. We have to be locked up. We can't let them slide off, right? They have to stay on our foot to compete. And then notice, this is a martial arts shoe. So yeah, I've been dunking, sprinting, dribbling with a martial arts shoe on, but that's because I'm just waiting for some company to make $1 billion making a basketball shoe with a lower heel. Doesn't mean it prevents ankle sprain, it reduces it. Australian study found 4 times more likely to sprain an ankle if you have that Nike Air cushion. And if you're a basketball player and you've ever worn Kobe's, he was onto it. He was already figuring this out and lowering and lowering and lowering that heel. Now, of course the cushion provides certain things, but I promise you from living it, you can provide that same cushion. I used to have chronic heel pain no matter how much I put there. Chronic plantar fasciitis no matter how much orthotics I wore. I promise if you rewire the way you think about weight training and you stop thinking of it in terms of, okay, bench, squat, deadlift, well, not to mention, are we building upper body and hips more than knees and ankles and feet? Also, your feet are rigid. So when you get into knees over toes training, as we'll cover, you actually get into world-class foot ability, ankle ability, protection, and these pains can just totally disappear. So 2 injuries, identical. One was about 6 years ago, one was about a year ago. Completely different recovery times though, even though they start out the exact same, meaning the symptoms were, by the time I got home, like I had to immediately stop playing. If it's a minor roll, you can keep playing, it might swell later, but you know if you had a serious one, you know it's screwed, you're already limping. Within 10, 15 minutes, you can't even stand anymore. And if you even try to put pressure on it, like if you try to get out of bed and even try to hobble or anything, just by standing up, the amount of blood and how much that hurts, you're then throbbing in pain for like 10, 15 minutes. So in both of these cases, I couldn't get out of bed for days, meaning I would have to put my leg up in the air and scoot on my butt if I wanted to go to the bathroom, because otherwise letting the foot down all was just too painful. Now, 6 years ago, I followed the typical rest, ice, compression, elevation, modern rehab. If you look in my description, I even wrote an article helping explain to you that the guy who created rest ice compression elevation has since said he was wrong. So if you Google what to do after certain injuries like an ankle sprain, it'll tell you what the very guy who created this now says and knows was wrong, and he's written all about it. And in my article, I give his article. Anyways, check the description if you want to learn more about why rest ice compression elevation is scientifically wrong. So it took about 6 months after that 6-year ago sprain, about 6 months later before I could even really play basketball. And even 3 years after that, even though I had figured out how to bulletproof my knees, or so I thought, I was able to get them much more bulletproof, as I'll explain. 3 years after that sprain 6 years ago, my right ankle that happened to still did not have as much mobility as the left. So you know, if you had a severe sprain, sometimes that can affect you the rest of your life. So at that point in time, I was having such good results with knees, but I was like, I gotta be able to figure this out, right? So if you've been following me for the last 3 years, you've seen that I've been literally more obsessed than anyone in history with ankles. I've done more tibialis raises. I then started seeing, okay, what happens if I get as strong as I can in ankle mobility, right? So rather than just addressing the knee, I started addressing the ankle like crazy. Now I have world-class ankle mobility. Couldn't even remember which sprain these things happened to until I actually had to look back to even remember, because the ankles are so even. My stalled 38-inch vertical as of 3 years ago jumped right through to 42.5, went right through, and my knee bulletproofing went to a whole nother level, because old school science shows that what your ankle can't handle goes up to your knee. So we know that the better and more capable you get your ankle, and you've seen I've been pumping tens of thousands of tibialis raises and all this stupid stuff. Well, I've turned ankle stuff into squat, bench, deadlift. Apply this, the same principles can be applied to any muscles, and you have over 25% of the different muscles in your body are from your lower leg and below. Anyways, old school science, we already know this. We already know that whatever your foot and ankle can't handle goes up to your knee. This is simple fact, right? Like, let's say theoretically you had the ankles 100 times stronger than normal human. You would just flex your ankles and you would jump up and dunk, right, without even bending your knee, and then you would land on your tippy toes. You see what I mean? Your knee would never, you would break Usain Bolt's world record with straight legs, right? No one's ever gotten that strong, but you get my point, is that the better you get your lower leg, the more protected you are upwards. Now, new school science, which I believe in 100%, and this is only coming out in the last year or so, is showing that humans do have some of those. I don't want to get into all the complex terms, but basically some of the kind of proteins that salamanders have that we can regenerate cartilage. So I've been believing this for years based on working with people in their knees who were told, oh, you have no cartilage, yada, yada, yada. My wife had a cartilage problem. I was told I was running out of cartilage in one of my knees, and now getting way bouncier, pain is gone. So, and even many of these people going to their doctors and being like, yeah, your cartilage is fine. So like that, it's not adding up. Well, now in the last year or so, this is starting to add up. But here's how it relates to the ankle. Like a salamander, you're able to regrow cartilage easiest farthest from the body. So you can regrow cartilage in your hips, but it happens much faster in your knees, and it happens even faster in your ankles. You see that? So wherever the salamander gets chopped, it can regrow cartilage fastest farthest from the body. The closer it gets in, the closer towards actual death versus being able to heal it ourselves. So I do think that's what occurred 3 years ago by then becoming obsessed with the ankles. I reached whole new levels of performance. I even got things that I never thought about in exercise science, like what about Michael Jordan's pull-up jump shot? That's not a vertical jump test. A vertical jump test, you get to stand there, you get to use your hips. You don't get to use your hips like that in a pull-up jumper because you're not telling the defense that's what you're doing. You're going forward, and then boom, on the dime, you have to stop with your ankles and knees to stop you from going this way. So now it's not, what about a long jump? Well, that's completely different. Here, a Michael Jordan pull-up jumper, the advantage is being able to go as fast as you can that way and as high. No study's ever been done on how fast can you go that way and then how high can you go that way. It's never existed, right? But Michael Jordan and tons of players, even today, athletes in different sports, are making hundreds of millions on things that have never been tested. So without even training for it, I just started noticing all of a sudden, like, holy, like basically a pull-up jumper just became part of my game without even trying to. And that didn't occur until that point about 3 years ago. And anyone who's played basketball knows that I didn't have a pull-up jumper. Then all of a sudden, a few years ago, I start like elevating for jumpers. Anyways, I think pretty cool things can happen And it's still so early in the game that I can't give you a bunch of fancy facts and figures about trying to get this amazing, strong ankle mobility on both sides, because we don't have studies on the tibialis and these various things that myself, and we even have world champions doing this stuff. So world champs often know, and my original mentor, Charles Poliquin, taught me that it could take 20, 30 years for this stuff to slowly go through the universities and be tested and so on. So often look at what the world champs are doing. They're probably doing stuff, as we've seen decade after decade, that you look at what were the world champs doing, and then 20, 30 years later, we're finding it verified. So all the different pains went away. I forgot to even mention that my shin splints were absolutely horrendous, plaguing me for years, all the way up till 3 years ago. No duh, because no matter how strong you get your knee, you're only pulverizing your shins even more. Now it's completely gone. I've forgotten what shin splints even feel like, and I thought I would live with them the rest of my life. So shin splints, plantar fasciitis, heel pain, all this chronic lower stuff, gone. Now, brings me up to 1 year ago. Now I had the same kind of sprain, thinking I'd be out months. Well, I was back dunking 9 days later. We're gonna retrace exactly what I did. It started with the flossing. I knew the flossing because of using it, and to this day I still use it for people as an option to pin down the tendons to help get into deeper knee bending. So with the ankle, by pinning down the tendons, I found that before I could even walk, I was able to sit in bed and strap up and actually start getting miniature workouts. And because it's resisting your ankle, it's like even cooler than what you can. I mean, it's just the coolest thing, because you're actually creating your own little ankle machine, because you're resisting. It's pressure, pounds of pressure that you have to then fight and work against. I started doing that 100 reps, 10 times a day for 1,000 reps a day. By day 5-ish, I was able to head back to ATG, head back to the gym. When I went back into the gym, I already knew from an ankle exercise I had developed about a year prior, not for myself, but for people with chronic ankle issues, that doing this stuff alone, while that worked for me, some people still had ankle issues. We had over 10 cases, their word, not mine, not a doctor, of their doctor allowing them to cancel ankle surgeries off loading their ankle, right? Going in circles with dumbbell, measurable amount. I want you to get to where 10% of your body weight is easy. 10% of your body weight should not cause pain and should be easy. That's a mark I found anyone can get to, and that creates a really good mark for being able to go back on the court. So within like 4 days of that, I was back on the court dunking. Now, at that exact same time, one of my best friends in the world, we became pretty inseparable after he gave me a shot to train him. He was the first pro athlete that ever let me train him.
I had a broken ankle, then I tore my Achilles. Most people, including myself, thought my career was over.
He was cut out of the NFL, undrafted guy to begin with, looked like he would probably never play again. He wasn't sure if he'd ever play again, and now he was being told that the Achilles rehab would make him ineligible for the next season. It would take too long. He'd miss the whole next season. He had already played 3 years, which is the average in the NFL. Undrafted guy, wasn't looking good. Anyways, I was so obsessed with all this front, back, ankle stuff that we got him back to the league. He actually only retired of his own choosing. He still actually had his highest contract offers ever, but he played a nice 7-year career, was completely healthy, actually finished running the fastest, jumping the highest of his entire career. So we were inseparable, and now he was back home right around that time that I was getting back on the court. So this is how stage 3 of the ankles came about. He started coaching my defense in basketball, right? But I'm not the defensive guy. I'm like, okay, Leonard ran a 4.71 at the combine when he was going into the NFL, which is one of the slowest ever for a cornerback. He's not even 5'10", he's 5'9" and change, and he played 7 years in the NFL. And of course I helped, but he was already in the NFL on his own, right? And his lateral speed was insane. So I was like, look, this guy's made millions of dollars just for going laterally and staying in front of people. So basketball, he's got to be able to help me, right? So I just dove in. Immediately found that when I play basketball, my ankles do not bend the way the top guys. Michael Jordan's ankles were moving differently than mine. Kyrie Irving, all these guys, even James Harden and guys, you know, find someone shifty and you're gonna find their ankles damn near slapping the floor. So that's all Leonard had me do. He had me start doing 3 sets of 60 seconds, take about a 2-minute break between sets. You can use this as actually like a cool down after workouts. It's pretty intense, and as I mentioned at the beginning, you may need to regress it to get it into pain-free. Fast forward, I'm looking at my footage, and I was looking at my footage, he wasn't lying. My ankles never went down like that. Looking at my footage later, ankles going down, crossover completely changed. So I owe that all to Leonard, and it also made me realize, and then later when I was helping people with their ankles, that this can be kind of a missing step. So this ability to just handle, it's your own weight, right? You shouldn't be in excruciating pain to lean your own weight to either side, especially when some of the best athletes on earth are able to handle those positions. So performance or not, I believe that's just common sense that if you can handle those positions, you're gonna be more protected. Huge thanks to Leonard for that. I think somebody sprained an ankle. So let's get into the conclusion. The conclusion is that you don't even have to do these 3, as evidenced by the fact, look at Leonard. He did this in drilling and played like this. So I think that's one reason he recovered so well with me, is he already was doing the side to side. So I brought in the front to back to world-class levels and, you know, never been healthier, faster, yada, yada, yada. Whereas for me, I don't play like that. Or I didn't, I should say, now I do. So for me, this was a game changer, right? So this isn't something everyone has to do because a lot are already doing this naturally. But if you're not putting your body in those positions, you're not creating those adaptations over time, or you've had an ankle injury and now maybe one side isn't right, this is for people who need help. I'm not saying that everyone has to do this. Any of these can tie right into Kneeability by using them as cool downs after sessions, or I should say warm down, right? So I wouldn't want you to get your ankle unstable before a session, meaning it's gonna be tired. We're tiring out these different muscles. So I think you could do this after Kneeability sessions. I think you could do any and all of these 3 levels. But there's one last thing I just have to cover with the ankles, and it's your hamstrings, because you're 4 times more likely to injure your hamstring once you've had an ankle injury. And that really goes for anything in your foot, ankle, or Achilles, because once you have any kind of lower leg issue, your foot's in a boot, you lose a lot in your ankle. Now what happens, now imagine sprinting, right? So let's say one side, because rarely do you just tear both Achilles or sprain both ankles at the same time. So usually it's one side, right? So let's say one side is solid. Now we're adding in the other side, but the ankle can't handle it. So now what has to take the force? Just as we're more likely to injure our knee. So we know the less the ankle can bend, the more likely we are to tear a knee ligament. What's the same for the hamstring? After an ankle injury, you're also more likely to pull your hamstring. Simply, whatever can't be handled here is likely to come up. So I also want to see athletes develop world-class hamstrings before rushing back in the sport. It doesn't take that long. At least be on the route to it, and at least be aware that your hamstring, so either on one side, if you don't bring your ankle fully up to par, and with this kind of stuff, with Kneeability plus this video, we can go beyond what you were before, right? So if you don't bring the ankle up though, hamstring's more at risk, and just be aware to also be realizing you need to be addressing your hamstrings extra. Sprinting develops your hamstrings. Now when you have one of these injuries, you stop sprinting. Without realizing it, you lose a lot of hamstring strength. So it's just a killer, and I've personally talked now to multiple Olympians who you can track their career, and it happened with a foot, Achilles, or ankle surgery, then turned into chronic hamstring injuries, and that was it. They were never able to find out what they were really capable of. So that's the purpose of this video, is not just to help you with your ankle, but I hope you can see that you also might unlock and find out what your true potential is. Let's not let a stupid ankle roll that we cannot prevent by certain sports. It's not our fault. Let's not let this stop us from finding out what our actual potential is and finding out, what we could really make of ourselves.